Alright everyone, welcome back. Now in this lecture, I am going to show you how we can use the nested resources. So for an instance, let's go to our courses section, and in all courses, if I go to edit, I have now basically set up this basically form in such a way that on the left hand side we have all the modules that are required to create a course, and on the left hand side we have the relevant forms. So here you can see the first is basically like the course edit option. So here I can definitely change and update everything that is basically required to change. So this is pretty straightforward. This is just an update functionality going on behind the scenes. The second thing is basically, let me just open this. So here on the left hand side, all these things are related to a course. All right. So all these things basically are a child, or you can say in record, that will come in record of course, so that all these things will belong to a certain course. In this case, we have the course ID of 1. So now if I click on that, so you will see that this now form opens, which contains all the learning outcomes. Definitely this is not yet dynamic. This is just a static form now. But if you take a look at the URL, you can see that we now have courses, then course ID, and then the next controller which I created in previous video. So let me show you how this thing works. So if we take a look at our web.php, so here you can see we have created this resource controller, the resource route endpoint, which is basically like courses, and then the next controller, which is basically the name of the whatever we can define the name, and then the controller itself. Now if I go to the controller, and this is the index method. Okay, so this index method by default contains the course and the course model. Okay, now the reason is that because we are passing the course ID. So now if you imagine, if I try to change this course ID, I will definitely ending up to having like no record founds. Alright. So if I go back and if I reload the page, so when the ID is basically like the correct ID or correct course, so this will automatically load the course model, and this will automatically resolve the dependency. And at the end, I'm just outputting the view file. So for the view file, what I am doing is basically I have just created this HTML form, and I just ran the for loop. So it is just basically showing the description or the learning outcomes 5 times. All right, so let's get started with make it dynamic. So the first thing that we need is basically make sure that you remove the unnecessary things, and also use this form action now. So the form action now this time would be courses dot the controller name, the course learning outcome dot update. Now the reason why I am going to use so instead of update we should use store. And the next thing is basically we must have to pass the course ID here, because that does requires the course ID. If you take a look at the route list, so PHP artisan route list, and you will definitely see here, let me see where it is. Here you can see that this is a post controller, and this is a like courses forward slash course. So this is the course ID that we definitely must have to pass, otherwise this will throw us an error. All right, so that is why we are passing the course ID, and then our method would automatically be post one, not the put. And then we have these courses. Now the second thing is basically we need to do is, let's open our service file and create a function, public function all, and this will definitely return us the course the course learning outcome. Okay, so we have not created the controller or model yet, so let's create our model. So PHP artisan make model course learning outcome. All right, so let's use course learning outcome model, and this will definitely give us all. Okay, so now moving here, we need to basically use the protected, guarded, and it should be empty like so. And this will definitely return us the collection instance of database. Now we need to pass the outcomes. So just load $this service and all. So let's pass the outcomes here. And inside our form, we need to load. So we need to check at the rate if outcomes count is greater than 0. All right. So what we need is basically we need to run for each loop on outcomes as outcome, and let's copy the HTML from here. And in this way, what we need is basically we need to define the outcome of ID for our description, and we can definitely use the loop iteration. And again, outcome ID would be here, outcome ID. And for the value, we definitely need to show a value like the second parameter. Okay, so this would be the outcome ID as well. So here it should be description, and again here it should also be loop iteration is equal to 1, so it should autofocus. Now if there is no outcomes, only then I would like to show the else statement of 5 outcomes. Now if I try to reload the page, so by default we have no outcomes, and what I also want is basically if there is any outcomes, so what I would also like to have is the input type of hidden, and the name would be outcome ID, and the value would be outcome ID like so. Now the reason is that I will explain you why I need that. So I will also do the same here, but this time the value would be 0. Okay, so let's try to submit this form. And in order to submit the form, we definitely do not need a create, and we definitely do not need any other. So let's also make our changes here. So show we do not need create, we do not need update, but we do need destroy. I think we have removed the destroy function. We do need the destroy here. So we need only two ones. Okay, and we will let the request as it is because definitely there is nothing much to worry about. So we also need to make sure that we are getting the course here as well. So let's grab this function, this piece of code from here and paste it directly this one. And course, just change the name of course outcome, add it successfully, redirect response. And for the store, let's create a function. So public function, store and request. And inside the request, this is the main thing that comes. So first of all, we are going to get the IDs, outcomes, outcome, you can say outcome underscore IDs, dollar request, input, and outcome ID. All right. So the default one would be an empty array. And next we also need is basically the description. So let's also use the description here. And now we need to run a loop. So first of all, what we need is basically we need to check if um, count, if count, okay, why is it pointing to this one? I'm not sure. So if count course ID is greater than 0, so definitely we have this outcome IDs here and here as well. So if there are any course outcome IDs, so what we need is basically we are now going to run for each loop, and inside this for each loop, what I want is basically I want to check if um, outcome ID is greater than 0, okay, else I will run something else. Okay, so if there is any outcome ID, which means that the outcomes are already in the database, so what I'm going to do is basically I will use instead of let's creating a new function, so what I am be doing is basically actually let's you create a function and let's say update, and inside the update let's pass the course outcome, and else let's use the save method, and also you pass the outcome of 0 or maybe nothing, just pass the description. And inside the description, since this is our key value, so we also need to use the key here, and description should be passed as an individual key and here as well. So key and key on both places. So let's create a function of protected function update and protected function save. All right, and we definitely do not need the outcome ID here. So we are now having this. We are basically missing one more thing, is basically we need to also pass the course here as well. So this is really important, otherwise we would not be able to guess against which course the outcome or description has been added. So in one, when it comes to update, first of all that we need is basically we need to get the outcome, so course learning outcome, and find it by outcome ID. So we can check if outcome is, if there is any outcome, so what we can do is basically, so outcome description equals to description, we can definitely update that, and we can use outcome update. All right, and this will definitely return void. And for the save functionality, what we need is basically we need to create course learning outcome create, and inside the create we need the course underscore ID, and that would be the course ID, and finally the description would be description. All right, and this also returns us void. So let's also use the unwanted brackets, because this is a single line if else, and we can also convert this into a ternary as well, but I think there is no need. And let's also return null here. So let's try to insert any learning outcome. So let me open the lipsum, forget that some dummy text. Let's paste this one and click submit. Okay, seems like this did not work. Let me refresh. Okay, we also need to make sure that this comes to store. Okay, so actually the issue is that it says the description column cannot be null. And the reason is that if we are inserting description in one column, so definitely all other columns are empty. So that is why it is creating a problem. So in that case, what we need is basically we need to check if not empty trim description. If it is not empty, only then we need to make sure that we insert the record, because otherwise this will throw an error. So if I now submit, you can now see we have learning outcomes now. All right. Now the next thing I would also like to have is basically um, so here in this scenario you can see that we also need an add more button as well. So for that reason, what we can do is basically we can either add another button of add more, or we can also basically whenever there is a submit method, we can by default just show the one button here as well. Sorry, the one input field. So for that scenario, what I want is basically when there is any after running for each loop, um, what we can do here is basically uh, we can actually, let's use it this way, is uh, let's all grab this for each loop from here, or maybe actually just let this as it is and create a new button of add more. So just name it add more, and that should be secondary button. If I now refresh, okay, yeah, that's correct. Add more, and this should be type of button, and just use on click add more, just name it add more. Okay, or maybe add more learning outcomes. Okay, and for this scenario, what we need is basically, let's open our custom scripts.js function. Let's create a function add more learning outcome, and we basically need to have a button here. So that should be named as hash add more. Not a button, sorry, the input field, the div where we are going to append the add more, okay, functionality. So let's start off by saying dollar hash dot append. All right, and this will definitely append the learning outcome. So all we need is basically we need to grab this one. Let's open the minify HTML functionality. Minify HTML, paste our HTML. We basically need to remove the curly braces from here, learning outcome, and we also need to remove these curly braces and outcome from here as well, because definitely these things do not work with JavaScript. Okay, so we need to make sure that we remove everything. Let's copy and paste it here. Okay, and now if reload the page, if I now try to click on add more, you can see we now have learning outcomes. So let's try to add one more learning outcome and see how this will work. So let's insert the learning outcome. So now we have two learning outcomes. Add more. Let's add one more just for an example. Submit, and you can see we now had outcomes. So now if I try to submit, so these will be updated. So let's use this one. So you can see that now these are updated, and if we are now going to add any more, so this will basically add more for us. Let's also make one more final thing, and that is let's put the add more function at the very end. So d dash flex justify content between, and if I reload the page, now that's correct. Okay, so this is the functionality that I wanted to have. All right, so now the main purpose of showing this is how we are actually going to use the resource controllers moving further in our courses as well, in our lectures as well. So for the next two sections, the prerequisites and target audience, I want you to do your work on that. Create a separate controller, a service class, and a model, and create a resource controller and link these two options there. And when it comes to the curriculum, I will create the full HTML, and I will show you how the HTML is working, and then we will start working on making it dynamic. Alright, that's about it, and I will see you in the next one.